Mike, thank you for having me tonight. My talk tonight is Money Alternatives of the Civil War. I am a member of the American Numismatic Association, the Civil War Token Society, Token and Metals Society, Collectors Club of Boston, and I'm president of the Old Colony Civil War Roundtable of Dedham. Now, basically what that means is I pay a lot of money in dues. I don't want you to think I'm this world-renowned expert. This is just my passion. I really love this subject. Now, during the Civil War, some of the coins that were circulating at the time was an Indian head cent. It was made out of copper and nickel. And this was relatively new. The old coins were large cents and they were made out of copper. They had a silver 3-cent piece. This was popular because stamps were 3 cents to mail a letter. And something called a half dime. This was made out of silver. If you were back in the 1860s and you told someone you had a nickel, they wouldn't know what you were talking about during the Civil War because they only had what they called half dimes. And just for laughs, I took a picture of a $50 typical design that would have probably been circulating at that time. And this one, 1859, is a silver dollar that would have been circulating during the war. So my talk is alternatives. Why did they need alternatives? Well, within a few months after the start of the war, it said that over $200 million in small change disappeared. Now, that's a lot of money considering you're doing it in pennies and 3-cent and 5-cent pieces. There was a lot of fear. You have the uncertainty of war. You never know how it's going to end. And so what happened was the price of silver went up, and everybody started to save the silver coins because they were now worth more than face value. If you guys are my age or older, you probably remember back in 1964, this fairly recent history, the price of silver went up and people started hoarding the quarters. So we now have the copper clad quarters. So how do you deal with that coin shortage? Well, some businesses accepted postage stamps. The problem with that is as you were using them, they get dirty, they tear. If you put a bunch of them, put a bunch of them in your pocket and then walk 5 miles to town in August and see what shape they're in. You know, it's not the most conducive way of using, best way of using them. The post office did not like it because they were always running out of stamps. One of the other ways they did it, somebody came up with this idea. It was an encased postage stamp. You would have a stamp, you would put it inside, and you would put a thin layer of mica. As you know, mica is, you can hold it up to the light and see through it. You just put it right over there, and they would, you would know what stamp it is. So this one would be used for 10 cents. On the back, it would have some advertising on it. The problem with these is that it costs like 7 cents or so to buy the holder. And if you were only putting a penny in there, you know, you were out a lot of money. So this was not the most effective way of dealing with the coin shortage. You will see these on eBay. They probably go 500 plus because they're quite rare. Now, businesses issued paper scrip. As you know, counterfeiting is against the law. So they would print these and they would have, you can see this little saying under the house or on the left-hand side of the top script. It says, "This is not currency, but a memorandum for change." And they had to put something like that on there. Otherwise, they would be in trouble with the law. They did not want to be hauled in for counterfeiting. This one was dated 1863, but it was not signed, so it was never issued, the apothecary one. And the other one, I just picked that up cheap one time because it had a cool train on it. So a lot of businesses, you will see a lot of paper scrip available for that during that time period. Fractional currency. Well, people remembered the saying, "not worth a continental." We were only about, what, 60, 70, 80 years away from the Revolutionary War. You probably remembered your grandparents elderly grandparents saying, "Oh, never take money from the government, never take paper currency." So they used these. They weren't real popular. You have on the bottom a 3-cent piece of currency. It's probably about 1.5 inches tall by 3 inches wide. The other one, the 10-cent, is just a little bit bigger. These are out of my collection. The 3-cent one, as I mentioned, it was 3 cents to mail a letter, so that one would be fairly well used if they accepted it. So with the solutions, of course, there was also bartering, but a lot of them would use tokens, and these tokens, you couldn't have them as money because only the federal government could legally issue money. But why were these tokens accepted? If you owed someone 2 cents, you might give them 2 of these tokens. They were illegal. Well, there was no alternative. All of the government issued money was being hoarded. If you were lucky enough to have some, you could probably use it. But technically these tokens were illegal. You figure the people probably trusted that merchant they were dealing with more than the government. The government is the one who got them into this mess. The merchant, they probably went to school with them, or their kids play together. Everything was local there. So in these little towns, you probably might have gone to a lodge with the merchant. So you trusted him more than the government. There are 3 types of Civil War tokens. Patriotic tokens, those have sayings on them and pictures. The patriotic pictures. The store card tokens would have the businesses' names and addresses on them. So you would have some advertising in with the use of them as change. And then sutler tokens. I say 3 things about sutler tokens. They're very rare, they're very expensive, and my wife won't let me collect them. So I do have some at the end of this that I will show you, and we'll discuss some of the sutler tokens. Here's some of the patriotic tokens. They tried to make them as looking a lot like the current currency, a current coin. So you see on the right, the Indian head penny. Looks like, if you looked at that quickly, you would assume it was a legitimate government issued coin, but it's not. The one, Miss Liberty, this is another figurehead that somebody may be familiar with. It made the coins, or made the tokens more acceptable to people. But remember, only the government can issue money. So on the back of these, the one on the left says not 1 cent, and the one on the right says I owe you 1 cent. So you could say to the, especially the one that says not 1 cent, if you got hauled before a judge, hey, doesn't say 1 cent, I wasn't making money. Other themes that you'll see on the back of these tokens, it might say our Army, our Navy, Army and Navy, death to traitors, no compromise with traitors. There's a slew of them there that are kind of interesting. This guy who issued this token, beautiful token, you get a beautiful sailing ship on it, but notice he doesn't have his name on it. He prefers copper. He wants to have some money, some metal in his hand rather than government issued paper. So he says a 20% premium for copper. Another top popular patriotic theme would be our little monitor. This was, this is 6 different designs on this one. You figure this was the pride and joy. Who knew metal could float? They had metal boats now. They had a revolving turret. There's no side wheels or sails on this one. It's because there was a propeller on it, brand new technology. Steam engine, brand new, well, relatively new to use. So this portrayed everything that was new and what was going right in the United States. But out of those 6, you'd probably find 4 of them, at least 3 of them very easily. Maybe the 4th one you could find. The other 2 are a little bit hard to find. They're very rare. Other patriotic tokens would have Ben Franklin, George Washington, the great General Franz Sigel. He's mentioned on, he's got his own token. And but notice Grant, I didn't mention Grant. Grant was never on a Civil War token, but the great General Franz Sigel was, and his token says, "The hero of Pea Ridge." It's got a picture of him on horseback waving his sword over his head, leading the charge. Now, some of you may not think he's the best general, but why was his image put on a token? I mean, it's not like he had his brother-in-law make the tokens, you know? Oh, wait a minute, I misspoke. Yeah, he had his brother-in-law make the token, so that's why he is mentioned in such a heroic fashion. General George McClellan is also on there. Myself, I believe that that should be classified as a presidential campaign token, but more important people than me think that it should be a patriotic token. And you can find eagles on them and flags and Masonic symbols. And this guy, he actually appears on a few. Again, I call them a presidential campaign token. On the back, it says Lincoln and Union on the back of this one. Very popular. Lincoln, most of his tokens, if they're decent, go north of $100. This one I just threw in. It's a neat picture of a cannon, and there's 3 different cannon tokens. One says Peacemaker on it, and then there's a third one that's very rare. You'd be lucky if you could find that one. That one would go for quite a few $100. But this one right here was probably a $50 token, $40, $50. The flag of our Union. Can you get more patriotic than the flag? There are actually 11 different designs. Every time the die was made, it was done by hand. And you can, when you look at it, you can see subtle changes in them. Maybe the stars in the field are a little different. On the flag, the stars, some of them have 25, some of them have 26 stars. You'll find the way that it waves is a little different. So you can pick them up. Like I said, there's 11 different ones. If you're a collector of these things, you would really pay attention to that. So this says the flag of our Union, and on the back, if anyone attempts to tear it down, shoot them on the spot. This is a quote by John Dix, which is mentioned. So his name is in the middle there. I have the 2 of them there. They're identical, right? You know, they both say if anyone attempts to tear it down, shoot them on the spot. There's actually 10 different dies, and they vary just a little bit. If you look at spot on the left, the word spot, the S and the W from down, and then you go to the other one and you look, the S is in a different position. Also the T in the and if, it's in a different position. This was all done by hand, so there's just little changes that you will see in the dies, and that's enough to get it to be assigned a different number, which I'll go into in a minute. Some of them, whoops, I get ahead of myself. So if you're doing them, engraving this die, if you want something raised up on the coin, it has to go in to the die, and it has to be a mirror image. So the only way, so it's kind of difficult. And so somebody put one that says, if anyone attempts to tear it down, shoot him on the spoot, S-P-O-O-T. This one's everybody collects. So you pay a premium just because of the silliness of what he wrote on the back. But again, the poor guy, he had to do it in a mirror image. He's working in something. These are the size of a penny. So he's working on in a small area. He just had a bad day. But not everybody was in favor of the war. Some people who don't study the Civil War just think, oh yeah, the North was right, the South was wrong, and that's the end of it. But there were some pacifists that issued tokens, and they called them unpatriotic tokens. This is a subdivision of patriotic tokens. You'll have something like this that says the horrors of war on the top, and it has the grieving widow, and down the bottom it says blessings of peace with the cornucopia with all of the nature's bounty in it, really pushing for anti-war. This one, millions for contractors on the front. On the back it says not 1 cent for the widows. So they were trying to protest who was making the money on this while the widows suffered. Another one is concession before secession. People wanted to, well, maybe we will let them have slaves. Well, of course, that wasn't going to fly. And this one is hard to see. On the cuff, it says south, and on the other cuff, it says north, and they're shaking hands. It says peace forever. This die was not well, or this coin was not well struck, and it's very hard to find one that has a real clear north and south on the cuffs. This is probably the best that I've been able to find. If you do find one that's really clear, you pay a lot of money for it. So that's why I have this one there. So someone with much more patience than I do, a guy by the name of George Fold, he and his brother went through and numbered each token. And the front of the token would have, the first number is the front or the obverse. The second number is the reverse of the coin, and the letter is the metal that it's made out of. You really need to buy a reference book, because if somebody is selling something, they will list just this. And this is one of the shoot them on the spot ones. But you wouldn't know that if you just saw the numbers. You need the reference book. The letter tells you the metal. They're usually made out of copper, and most of them are the size of a penny, modern penny, but they can be made out of bronze. You'll see some that are lead. Some of the store cards made out of silver, and there's one store card that's even made out of, a couple of them really, that are made out of rubber. I'm just going to skip that last one, that on how to grade them. If anybody wants to ask me at the end, I'll go over that. Let's just, so we did patriotic tokens. Let's look at store card tokens. These have the names and addresses on the token. You could use them for change, and you would get some free advertising. But there's about 8,500 different tokens issued by about 1,500 merchants in 400 cities and about 22 towns, mostly 22 states, mostly northern states. I always say about, because they're actually finding new ones. Somebody found that a collection had been donated to the Detroit, Michigan library. Guy went up there, the librarian allowed him 1 hour with the collection. And it was a massive collection, but within that 1 hour, he found 3 previously unknown tokens. So they still can find stuff that they're great to research. Who issued them? Well, anyone in town, general stores, bakeries, breweries, saloons, doctors, dentists, druggists, gunsmiths. If you are, Kittredge gun has one, if you're familiar with that weapon. Watchmakers, jewelers, blacksmiths. And what I like is this one. This one had cigars. So it's a little different than what we use now, cigars. So the obverse, which is the front, would have the name and address. The reverse could be just about anything. It could be a leftover patriotic die. So it might be a flag, might be Miss Liberty, could be an Indian, could be a cannon, could be just whatever they had left over. Or some of the people, they wanted to have custom, some of the businesses wanted custom made designs that was related to their business. And others have some that say good for, and that might be good for a loaf of bread, good for a pint of milk, quart of milk, gallon of milk, your mug of beer, glass of soda. The good for tokens are harder to find because these businesses didn't want to be giving away free stuff all the time. So they would try to get those out of circulation as fast as they could. This is one of the custom made ones. I love this token because it's a picture or a window into the past. You can see exactly how somebody cooked on that. They get the pots and pans on the stove. You have the open doors so you know where to put the wood in, where the oven would be for baking. It must have been really interesting trying to bake a pie or bread in something like this. How do you regulate the temperature? They seem to know how to do it. I can imagine what kind of a mess we would have. But it really gives you an idea of what they were selling at that time and what the people were using. George Ames on the left, he was a drugstore in Illinois. If you were wondering what Mr. Kelly in New York was selling, you can see an image of a top hat. So he was selling top hats in New York City. Now, 7 of these tokens were actually issued by women. Think about it. How rare was it for a woman to own a business? Very rare. And out of those few people, only 7 of them issued tokens. I used to say 6, but there was one that just had, there's a token, it had the first initial and last name, and nobody knew what the first name was. Everybody was looking for a man's name. Finally, someone found, well, there's an Elizabeth, and they started researching it and found out that she owned a business. So I had to change this slide from 6 to 7. Other interesting ones that you can see, the guy on the left, that's an old milk can. Well, it was old to us, a milk can. He, on the back, it tells how he sells dairy equipment, anything that a dairy farmer would need. The one on the right is one of those good for 1 glass of soda. It's one that, it's a pharmacy token in New York City. And this is one that's fairly scarce again, because they didn't want too many of these circulating. They did not want to be giving away free stuff all day long. This one's kind of fun. Somebody researched this in the Civil War Token Society's newsletter, and they found out he had $15 sewing machines for sale. There's one problem. In that time period, there were 4 companies that made sewing machines, all suing the heck out of everybody for patent infringement. So they came to an agreement. They said, and this agreement would not fly today, but back in the 1860s it did. They said, we'll charge $25 for our sewing machines, and $10 of that will go into a fund, and then we'll split the money from there. And everybody gets a piece of the action, and we all agree to drop our lawsuits. So that was the agreement that they had. But this guy was advertising $15 sewing machines. If you look in a Detroit newspaper, you'll see his ad, $15 sewing machines. Right next to it, you'll see another guy advertising his sewing machine, but it'll say $25. But the difference between the 2 ads is the $25 one would say, our machines are properly licensed and guaranteed. And that was the difference. We were wondering how we got $15 sewing machines, whether they, shall we say, fell off the back of a wagon sometime, or whether they, were they a little stolen. I guess all of a sudden, though, somebody must have talked to him, and they maybe threatened him with lawsuits, and he did change his ads to $25 sewing machines, same as everybody else. But if you could afford a sewing machine, that really changed your family's lifestyle. You could now make their own clothing, and you could make clothing to sell to other people. So if you could get the $25 for a sewing machine and knew how to use it, you could really increase the wealth of the family. This guy, Mr. Bond, he's a druggist. I am a retired pharmacist, so I have more than my share of drugstore tokens. But what did he do in his spare time? Well, he went to lodge. He was a Mason. You can tell that by the symbol. And this was good if someone came to town and they were a stranger and they got this in their change and they happened to be a Mason, they would probably give him the business. Unfortunately, this is one of the more popular ones, or this business was popular during the Civil War. As you can tell from the one on the left, it's an Undertaker, and he's got a picture of a coffin on his. Because it's so weird, this one is always in demand. There are only 2 of them, by the way, that issued, only 2 funeral homes that issued tokens. This one, City of New York. This was another one. There was a great article in the Journal of the Civil War Token Society. This was researched for years. They checked the New York archives, they checked the historical societies, they checked the libraries, they checked City Hall. When was this issued by the City of New York? This went on for quite a while. Somebody in Connecticut found out there was a ship called the City of New York, and it would take the milk run from Norwalk, Connecticut to New York City every day, back and forth. They would also take passengers. Just like what we do now, they would have a snack bar. And this would have been used as change in the snack bar. So the things were not really different. People were still the same back then. They wanted to have maybe a little snack while they were on their way to New York. This coin was used on it. But who would have thought that it was a ship rather than the city of New York? This token, it's Felix's dining saloon. See, under the word Felix, you see some symbols there. That actually means kosher. So it's Felixs Kosher Dining Saloon. It is the only token with Hebrew on it, and this one is very popular. Probably the minimum you'd pay for one of these is 150, but if it's in real nice shape, you could go probably, it might brush 1,000 if you get into a bidding war with somebody else. Very popular. Here's another popular one, Philip Best. He owned Empire Brewery, and he paid to have custom-made dies for both sides of the coin, of the token. You have a nice picture of a mug of beer, and then on the back, it has all of the utensils that you would use if you were making beer. You have the beer barrel, etc. there. He's located in Milwaukee. What a great spot to have a brewery. The area, the Milwaukee area, was a heavy German population. So you had your beer sales were guaranteed pretty much. So he was quite popular. He had to have had some money behind him to have a double-sided custom-made token. Nowadays, of course, no one knows Philip Best. I'm sure if I asked you who knows Empire Brewery, I'd get a bunch of blank stares. The only thing he's really famous for nowadays, if people remember, is he had a pretty daughter. The daughter married the Civil War veteran. There's a guy by the name of Pabst. Probably some of you have heard of him. And he, nothing like Mr. Pabst marrying a brewer's daughter. This one was issued by a dentist. If the little picture of false teeth on there, custom-made false teeth. So this one is, again, another one that's pretty popular. There's another one that says teeth pulled painlessly, painless extractions. So it says, well, what they would do is one of them was a traveling salesman or traveling dentist. He'd go up and to attract a crowd, he'd get a brass band to play, and he would give them his solution, magic, which of course would probably be morphine, cocaine, alcohol, nice mixture like that. He'd have them drink a little bit of that, and then he'd start up the band, and he would pull the tooth. And of course, with the brass band playing, who heard the guy screaming? But anyways, just a little dentistry was a little bit different back then. You probably recognize this guy. If not, he's a Rhode Island general, General Ambrose Burnside. And you can see they exaggerated his sideburns. Well, maybe they didn't exaggerate it. They just put just a little bit different. I'm from Massachusetts, so I had to include this when I give the talks locally. The one on the left is Bunker Hill Monument in Charlestown. And the other one is from Boston. It's good for a cent, S-C-E-N-T. Is this a penny? No. He could legally, when he gets hauled before a judge for giving these out as money, say, no, it's just a novelty piece, Your Honor. I have a nice dog there and it's good for a cent. This one, Hussys Special Post. This one is tied for the finest known piece right here. I haven't checked recently to see if anyone's beaten it out. Hussey came up with the idea of delivering messages right to people's houses. During the Civil War, the post office would only deliver to the post office, and you had to go and walk down and pick up your mail, which is fine for regular mail. But the problem that became was insurance companies needed documents right away. Trading houses for stocks, you needed to get the certificates traded right away. Banks, they needed stuff right away to go from one spot to another. This guy had a little train. He also on the back of this one has a horse that's running, galloping down the street. He had door-to-door service, and this was what made him his fortune. He's, well, I should mention it. Another reason why I put this one up there is he is the only one who's issued a postage stamp. So you can actually get a stamp online, probably from eBay or other sources, maybe something more reputable, and find something. There's occasionally you get something that's counterfeit on eBay. That's why I just said more reputable. But it is kind of interesting if you have this coin and the stamp to go along with it. Now, there've been some pretty good stories behind these things. So they're really fun to look up. George Fuld, by the way, who numbered the patriotic tokens, like he didn't have enough time on his hands, he came up with a numbering system for store cards. The first initials are the state. 630 is the number. Every city and town was assigned a number. 630 is the city of New York. K is Thomas Brimelow. That he's the one who issued that good for a glass of soda. And he issued 9 tokens. So this one, you would have 1 through 9 listed. And then this one particular one, it's A, it's made out of copper. But like I had mentioned earlier, they could be in brass, silver, nickel. And then they have something that if they can't figure out what it is, they call it a white metal. So there've been some cool stories that I've mentioned today. I've always wanted to research them, but about 15 years ago, I was thinking of it, but I don't have time. I'm too busy. I'll wait till I'm retired, all that stuff. A million excuses. So I'm in the store, minding my own business, and some guy comes in and his last name is Brain. First thing I said to him is, I got a Civil War token with your last name on it. He says, oh, my great uncle issued Civil War tokens. So I managed to steer him in a direction where he could find one. And he was so happy. I mean, he had one that he is a historian. He's an archaeologist, really. He had his own Civil War piece of Civil War history, but a piece of his family history. And with shipping, it sent him back $28. So he was thrilled. And we got talking, and he said, well, I have unpublished manuscript that my grandfather wrote on the Brain family in the United States. So I was able to write up an article on this token using history books. I found out Springfield was on the National Road. Jefferson wanted a roadway, a nice road for people who wanted to travel out to the Louisiana Purchase. The road was built out to Springfield, Ohio, and it stopped because Jackson withheld the funding for it. So everybody who was traveling, they got to Springfield, they'd probably rest. Some of them would settle there. It was a real boom town. People made a lot of money there. This guy had a drugstore, but according to the family history, in 1865, at the end of the Civil War, he closed it down. And he ended up going down to Missouri. And the family feels he was one of those carpetbaggers that we read about. And he had his own sawmill down there that he had invested in. And then in 1868, he came back to Springfield and he started a lumber company. And it was quite successful. Their motto was lumbermen since 1868. And I asked the gentleman that was helping me with this article, I said, when did the lumber yard go out of business? And he said, oh my God, I hope they haven't. I just got a dividend check. So this was, lumberyard was actually in business until 2009 when the stock market went down and the housing crunch and everything else hit the fan. At that point, the company sold out. If you Google Brain Lumber Company, you will get it pops up, but with a different name. You will get the lumberyard. This is a cool picture of what it looked like. He was fairly successful. Obviously, you've got so much so he had to have his own railroad spur go right into his warehouse. So while I was looking through the history of Springfield, Ohio, I came across the name John Ludlow. And I came across the name Asa Bushnell, then John Ludlow, then Asa Bushnell, and back and forth. I said, gee, I wonder if any of them issued a token. I come across Ludlow and Bushnell, druggists. John Ludlow started the business. He got his training in Cincinnati and then came to Springfield and started a business. Asa Bushnell ended up in Springfield, and he was working for one of those a large manufacturing company. They made agricultural equipment, and he was a bookkeeper there. And he did okay, but eventually he became partners with Ludlow. Ludlow, why did they take a partner on? There's a couple reasons why. Maybe he needed money, but Ludlow really was president of the bank, so he didn't really need money. Maybe he needed reliable help, so he made him maybe that's why he made Bushnell a partner. Or maybe Bushnell had married Ludlow's daughter, Evelyn. And if you guessed that he married Evelyn, that was the correct answer. So Ludlow and Bushnell became partners. Like I said, John Ludlow was the president of the First Bank of Springfield. There was an opening on the board of directors. They did a nationwide search to find the best candidate. Who do they pick? Bushnell. He's on the bank now. Eventually, Ludlow wants to retire. He's president of the bank. He retires. They do another nationwide search to try to find the best candidate for president. Who becomes president of the bank? Bushnell becomes president. So he's starting to move up in the world. It's interesting. He always lamented that his meager education, I think he only made it to 3rd or 4th grade, but that's not to say he wasn't intelligent. And the company that he worked for, the agricultural company, it had like 4 different people that owned it. If you remember back in the 60s, 70s, company Merrill Lynch, B.S. Fenner and Smith, and now they shortened it to just Merrill. He worked for a company like that. Every time a partner got through, the name would change. And eventually his name got in there. And the company's evolved, and nowadays hardly anyone's ever heard of International Harvester or Navistar is what it's called now. Actually, still the biggest employer in Springfield. This guy, he made his money. Since he had the bank, he also had the president of the bank. He had access to funds. The town was a boom town with everybody going through it. They needed a trolley system. He started the trolley system. Then they wanted to become that modern city and have gas lights up and down the street. He started the gas company. So this guy had more money than God. And he decided he would run for Congress. Well, he lost. But it got his name out there. And they said, how'd you like to run for governor? And he said, well, I don't want to run for governor. My friend Bill is running for governor. So he supported his friend Bill. His friend Bill became governor of the state. Bushnell was in his cabinet. A couple of years go by, time for another election. His friend Bill wants to run as governor. Bushnell, they said, we want you as the lieutenant governor. Well, Bushnell's used to being in charge. He's got all these businesses. He's the man. Why would he ever want to be lieutenant governor? So he said, no, not going to be lieutenant governor, but I'll support my friend Bill. Next thing you know, Bill doesn't want to be the governor of Ohio anymore. Bushnell takes that opportunity to run for governor, and he becomes the governor of the state of Ohio. He is the only person who has issued Civil War tokens who went on to become governor of a state. This is one of the articles that I researched, had it published, and the Civil War Token Society actually gave me an award for this. No one had ever discovered that before. So Bushnell really had a lot on the ball. He was he ended up coming back to the city to do somebody else. Oh, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. His friend Bill, who didn't want to be governor anymore. Luckily, a guy by the name of William McKinley, he actually found himself another job. So he was pretty fortunate. Bushnell, except it didn't turn out that good in the end. But here's Bushnell, guy, businessman from Ohio. He's now governor. And who's his best friend? President of the United States. Doesn't get much better than that. So let's just hit sutler tokens. I usually don't discuss these because you can spend all day on it. But if you don't know what a sutler was, they would have a wagon full of goods that the Army was not providing to their men. Could be razor blades, combs, pens and pencils, paper to write letters home, some fresh fruit. Maybe they were able to score some fresh fruit. They would usually sell these things at a tremendous markup. Each sutler was assigned to a specific unit, and you could only use the sutler that was assigned to your unit. So here's one. This was from the 41st Regular Ohio Volunteer Militia, OVM, Ohio Volunteer Militia. Good for 5 cents with only this. He has his identification on the back. It's only good for at his particular wagon. And if you look at this token, you look at the condition, you're probably saying, well, what did he dig this out of the ground? I mean, it's that bad. And as a matter of fact, that's where it came from. This sutler had his wagon in a bad position, and it got hit with an artillery shell and ended up burning flat. Everything was destroyed. And years later, they started excavating the site, and they found a lot of these tokens. And these are, they're collectible. But if you find one that's hasn't been burned or buried in the ground, it sells for a premium. Most of the ones you see are like this. Now the 41st, when you get one of these, you look at it right there, 41st Regiment, Ohio Volunteer Militia, staring right at you. What's the first thing you do? You hit Google, and you put that in. You find out that they suffered a lot of casualties. They were held up as an example of good soldiering. These guys were the unit. If you were in a battle, and the outcome of the war was going to settle on this, this is the unit you wanted covering your flank. They were the best of the best. A couple of the members, either 2 or 3 of them, were awarded the Medal of Honor. So they were brave, tenacious fighters. Here's another one from Zouaves, the 34th Regular Ohio Volunteer Militia. Another one, the Zouaves, you're probably familiar, most of them started off the war with these beautiful, colorful uniforms. Once they wore out, the Army just gave them the regular ones and told them that that's their problem. But the Army wasn't going to dress them up. So the 34th, again, let's look at that and see, Google it and find out how group was this. This is the unit. If you're in the battle of your life, and the war outcome of the war is hanging in the balance, this is the unit you want to have guarding a bridge in Maine somewhere, maybe up around Fort Kent. It's about as far north as you can get in Maine. This group was known for being like the worst of the worst. I have here, I'll just read this thing that I found online. In a letter from Charles Tenney to Adeline Case, dated October 1861, Tenney offered his opinion of this regiment. Quote, "The poorest apologies for soldiers I ever saw. On drill, their movements are perfectly comical, and as to their principles, there are no gentlemen among them." That's a pretty strong term back then. If you, there's another notation in a diary of a guy by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes. He expressed the same opinion of this unit. Somehow they managed to make it out to about January of 1865, when most of them were captured. The pickets were all asleep. They didn't expect an attack from the Confederates. The Confederates knew that, so they attacked them and silenced all of the pickets without any shots being fired, got into the camp. They managed to capture most of the unit, not all, but most of them, a good portion of the officers. The officers ended up all being court-martialed. Besides capturing the men, of course, the Confederates were short on supplies. They got all of the forage for the animals. They got animals, so they got a bunch of horses. They got food, everything they could possibly need. And they just went in and just took it from these guys. So this was not this is the unit you did not want to be associated with. But the last two I looked at were infantry here. I don't want you to think they were all infantry. This one is issued by cavalry. I don't have a story to go with it, but just to let you know that it was not just infantry that had these. This one is a battery. So these are also another one. You have enough information there, you might be able to research it. And this is one that I have in my collection. It's one of 4 known pieces. The book says 4 known pieces. I happen to think there's 6. I sometimes disagree with the book, but the reference book. But this is from Sutler, John Longwell, and he was assigned to the 119th Regiment USCI. I took this one with me to a coin show, and I showed about 100 dealers. I like to show it off. I figured they'd never see one if it's one of 4 or one of 6. So I showed it to him and I said, so what's USCI? Not a clue. Two of them out of 100 knew what it was. And it's United States Colored Infantry. The history behind this piece is pretty cool. At least I think it is. These guys volunteered and they knew what would happen to them if they were ever captured, but they volunteered anyways. This unit was formed in January of 1865, right near the end of the war. They didn't see a lot of action. There were a couple of skirmishes that they were involved in, but still, I give them a lot of credit for volunteering. They just had a nickel, 1913 nickel cell, and there's only 5 of those. It sold for $4.1 million. This one, officially, there's only 4 of, and this one's is worth about $1,700. The reason why you get them so cheap is that a lot of people have never heard of them. They don't know what they are, and they don't realize how much fun they can be. So they're fun to collect, very hard to find. You go to a coin dealer, ask him if he's got any Civil War tokens. No, it's probably the answer. They're hard to find. I go to these major shows. I'm going to one in a couple days. There'll be 100 dealers there. I'll be lucky I find 3 that have any Civil War tokens. What's fun about the tokens, though, is that about 75% of them are well documented. You get one of the ones that the other 25%, start researching it. Check the genealogy. Do research, genealogy research on these people. Check the city directories, the history books, federal census, and the web. You find out incredible things about some of these guys. There was one just recently, Henry Varwig from Cincinnati. He was, it says on his token, he sold crackers in the city of Cincinnati. Well, that's not the full story. You find out he also had a contract to sell hardtack to the Union Army. So he made some decent money. After the war, he had a big building full of ovens. Right after the war, he ripped out all of the ovens. He had a little invention that he came up with. He developed patented the first self-venting beer faucet. Made him a fortune. Figure how many bars were out in the out west, and that was what they, he just fairly recently discovered. So they are fun. If you have some, take a look at them, try to find the story behind the story. You will have to buy the reference books from the Civil War Token Society if you're getting into this seriously. Now, the acts of 1862, I mentioned the tokens technically were illegal. They were illegal, outlawed in the acts of 1862. One person who's a lawyer started researching it. He could only find one person that was ever prosecuted. They kind of turned a blind eye because there was no alternative. But in 1864, it started to become a problem. People would use the tokens, but they weren't really required to accept the tokens back. There was no law that said they had to take them. If it had maybe their name and address, they probably had a moral issue on taking it back. But if it was a patriotic token, you couldn't tell where the person got it from. So that all of a sudden the solution became a problem, and so the government had to step in. But they didn't just outlaw it like they did in 1862. In addition to outlawing it, they changed the Indian head cent to all copper. They took the nickel out of it. That made it less valuable. They issued a copper 2-cent piece to help with the change. They had a 3-cent piece, was, as you remember, I told you it was silver. They changed the design and they made it nickel. So that people weren't going to hoard it for silver at that point. They changed the silver half dime to the coin that we now know as a nickel. It was called a shield nickel, but similar makeup to what we use now, similar size, exact same size. So that's what that brought an end to the Civil War, the era of Civil War tokens. So open it up to questions, but I will have this website if you want to jot it down. There's a lot of information on there. I think it's $20 to join, and you get a quarterly newsletter with some incredible information on it, in it, and you can. I think you'll enjoy it, and even the website has some old articles published, and I think you'll enjoy those. So that's it. I'll open it up to questions, Michael, and appreciate you guys taking the time to listen.